Hello, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well today. Today I'm going to go over a question that I often get. It's, how do you read so much? So you see this wall of books, which changes regularly enough because a lot of these are library books. And I've also got a large pile over here, a large pile over here, and there's a large pile in my apartment. And also a extremely large pile back home in Canada. So yeah, it's literally hundreds of books. How do I read so much? I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks for academic reading, especially if you're like an undergrad or a master's student and you're still dealing with that, oh my God, I've got 300 pages of reading. This is how I do it, and this is how I help myself. So we're going to take an academic book. We've got a lovely academic book here. This is a Sui Tung China and its Turco-Mongol neighbors, one that I've had to read for my thesis. So imagine I'm told I have to read this book. So the traditional way is you start from page 1 and you go and you go through it kind of. Okay. For academic reading and writing, not a good way to do it. A couple things you can do. First, look to see if it's mentioned elsewhere. A lot of times my book suggestions come from, I see in the footnotes of another book, I will see, in 227 of this book, in SCAFE 2008, I think. Not important right now. They mentioned this. Okay, so I will go to 227. Okay. Right? I've skipped half the book because I'm just looking for that specific reference. The other thing I often do is when I get a new book, so let's just say this is a new book. I've never looked at it before. It had an interesting title. Here's what I do. First off, I always look at the date. If it's pre-2000, I start to look with skepticism at this rate because generally that book is too old unless I'm looking for something specific. I often have to look at stuff from the 60s and 70s because of the nature of my research. Hooray for Soviet archaeologists. So, first thing I do, table of contents. That instantly gives me an idea of what I'm looking at and is it useful. So, for example, China, Indo-Asian borderlands, discourse and reality. Okay, it's going to intercultural interaction and adoption, society and economy of Turfan, Shijiao, a case study. Okay, this is actually going to be very useful for me. So right off the bat, I've identified a couple parts of the book that might be useful for me. Then, sometimes I'll actually just do a quick flip through. See what comes up. Okay, I see some maps, I see some other stuff. Great. Sometimes I'll even look and I'll see like, okay, there's some photos, there's some maps. Okay, this is potentially useful for me. I love a good map. There's a pretty map. Okay, lands of the Western Turks and Sogdia. Okay. Oh, this is actually quite useful. I think this mentions my site. No, it doesn't mention my site, but I can at least go, okay, there's a geographic relevance here because I can go, I know this area. So, quickly flip through and just see, does something catch your attention? Look to see, even, it sounds silly, but are there pictures? Because in archaeology, because we're very visual art, we love our pictures. If you see no pictures, that maybe is a bad sign. It means they're not necessarily going to show you examples of, say, the ceramics or the coins or maps. If there's no maps in a book, that's a good sign that maybe this is not a useful book. The other thing I will often do is I'll flip right to the back. If I'm lucky, there will be an index. And I will look for some keywords. So, for example, maybe I'm looking for Uyghur, Otrar. Otrar actually has multiple names. It's also known as Utrar or Farab, depending on your source. So I will look and I will see, do those come up? Okay, I see Samarkand, that's close. Good. Let's see, is Farab in this one? I think Farab's in this one. I suddenly don't remember. Okay, so Farab, or the site that I researched specifically, is not featured in this book. Now, that's a red flag. Not necessarily a red flag for me, but it's something that I have to consider. It's something I have to look at and go, okay, this is now a secondary source for me. It's not necessarily going to answer my primary thing. It's not going to be the smoking gun, but there might still be something useful in here. What I've now done is I've taken this 300-odd page book, 359, if we include the works cited, and I've split it into something where I know I'm not going to go through this bit by bit unless I'm looking for something specific. So I've now taken a 300-page book and I've whittled it down to maybe a half an hour read. Because with the nature of what we do, oftentimes we won't have 3 months to go through, say, all of this. I need to go through this relatively quickly. So that's what I often do. Sometimes I will, just for funsies. Some of these books are for funsies, as you can see if you were to look through the thing, through this whole. Because again, I have lots of very random interests. That's why there's random books on Burma, the Volga, the Hudson Bay Company. I'm Canadian, so I have to have some Canadian content in there. It's part of my citizenship and my contract. Yeah, so I hope some of those things helped you. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you don't have questions, okay, fine. That's cool too. Yeah, I hope everyone was able to learn something from that and got some useful ideas. That's all for today. Bye-bye.